Good evening to whoever still tunes in. This is Noah Cray, coming to you from Anchorage, Alaska, just like I have every Wednesday night for the past 8 years. You're listening to my little corner of the dial, 88.7 FM for locals, relayed to shortwave on 7.400 megahertz for the rest of you fine folks scattered across the country. And to the 10 or 11 regulars I know still make time for this signal. Rick in Fairbanks, Dee in Wrangell, the couple up in Whitehorse, I appreciate you. I really do. Normally, we'd be spending this hour talking about weird cloud formations over the Aleutians, how the S&P is crawling like a wounded bear, or how Europe still can't figure out how to keep their grid up when the winds die down. You know, the usual blend of half-interesting facts and quarter-baked opinions I spoon out while sipping bad coffee and watching the fire in my oil drum sputter. But tonight's different. Tonight, I need to talk to you straight. Not as a hobbyist, not as some crank on the edge of town with too many antennas, but as someone who sees the edge and knows it when it's staring back. Let me start where this usually begins, what I heard, because if you're still in one of the quiet zones, the parts of the country not ringing like a dropped wrench in a steel bucket, you might not know that something's off. It's not the kind of thing you catch on CNN between commercial breaks, and it's not flashy enough for a social media trend. But if you've been watching closely, like I have, listening late into the night, hopping from band to band across the dial, chasing ghost signals, piecing together what they're not saying, then you'd know this didn't start today. It didn't start with a bang or a headline. It started quietly. It started here. Now, I know that probably sounds dramatic. I've got a bit of a reputation in the local amateur radio groups for leaning into stories. But this isn't some tall tale about a plane vanishing near the Arctic Circle or whispers on the wind from an old Cold War bunker. This is different, tangible, measured, and worse, it feels intentional. Let me walk you through it. Last month, late July, I started noticing unusual traffic in the HF bands. You get used to a kind of rhythm out there. Cargo ships talking in bursts, military drills pinging around. Occasionally, some kid in Sweden messing with long-range skip. But these weren't any of those. I was getting pulses. 3-second bursts at regular intervals. Clean. Too clean. At first I figured it was automated telemetry, maybe something from the NORAD radar net. But then a few of my friends, guys up in Coldfoot and out near Adak, started hearing them too. Different bands, same rhythm. Within the week, I saw a drone flying low over Campbell Creek without lights. Not ours. I know the look of our surveillance birds. This one was too quiet, too stable, and vanished faster than anything I've seen before. I called it in, of course, but you know how it goes. Could have been a private model, they told me. Then came the port chatter. I've got a scanner tuned to Coast Guard ops, mostly out of habit. On August 8th, I heard one of their cutters try to hail an unidentified vessel off the western Aleutians. No response. The voice on the scanner sounded uneasy, not panicked, just off rhythm. Like they already knew what they weren't going to get. That same night, the regional FAA issued a TFR, MIS, a temporary flight restriction, MIS, over a stretch of airspace from St. George to Sandpoint. They said it was for military operations. But there were no drills scheduled. I checked the NOTAM logs the next morning. They'd been altered retroactively. You can't just backdate a TFR, not unless you're trying to make something disappear. That's when I knew I needed to start recording everything. So here's what I pieced together. A series of anomalous ship pings in the Bering. Low transponder drones flying grid patterns over Alaskan infrastructure. A dry run on our comms relay near Bethel that brought down the NOAA satellite feed for 2 hours with no explanation. And then the kicker. The loss of signal from DEW line station PX3. That's a Cold War relic, out past Shishmaref. Still running. Still manned. The transmission just stopped. Gone. And no, this isn't the part where I say black helicopters showed up. I don't believe in that crap. What I do believe in is logistics. Planning. Cold, methodical prep work. And someone, somewhere, has been prepping this. You want to know the moment I knew we were already in the opening moves of a war? August 14th. Port Mullet, tiny port town on the edge of nowhere. Mostly fishing vessels and supply tankers, running fuel drums and dried goods to Aleutian settlements. Around 4 in the morning, a ship flying Liberian colors approached the docks. Standard stuff. Except the dockmaster never cleared them. According to an intercepted Coast Guard relay, they tried to signal. No response. And then, that ship launched a drone boat, not a lifeboat. A combat, RIB, equipped with a remote-controlled turret system. It fired on the dock. 2 Coast Guard officers were killed. 1 is missing. And Port Moller is silent now. That's not rumor. That's confirmed. Buried in an encrypted channel, I accessed through a forum I won't name here. Because if I do, it'll be gone tomorrow. The audio log from that moment, I still have it. This is an active control zone. You are not to interfere. You will not be harmed if you do not resist. Remain where you are. The accent was Russian. Calm, cold, precise. They even used the phrase control zone, like this was already mapped, like someone signed off on it. By the next day, Dutch Harbor was locked down. Kodiak Naval Station stopped transmitting hourly updates. I heard a scrambled fighter wing vectoring west, but one of the pilots cut transmission mid-call, never came back on. Elmendorf went to alert level Bravo, then Charlie. Then the chatter just stopped, and I started getting feedback on frequencies that shouldn't echo. That only happens when someone else is using your systems against you. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not yelling, "The sky is falling." But I am telling you that we're not being told the truth. They're keeping this quiet on purpose. I think the logic is containment. Control the narrative. Prevent a panic. But that's already failing. Because tonight, I lost contact with everyone north of Talkeetna, and I think Anchorage might be next. I want to be clear about where I stand. I don't have a dog in the political fight. I think most governments are corrupt and incompetent by design. But this isn't incompetence. This is chess. Deep strategy. And Russia's been playing the long game while we bicker over budgets and hashtags. They didn't have to bomb us. They just had to disconnect us. Slowly. Precisely. Then move in. They know how isolated we are. How vulnerable the logistics chain is. How most of the state depends on a trickle of ships, planes, and fiber. Break the chain in the right place, and the whole machine grinds to a stop. So here's what I've got left. A working diesel generator. A rigged broadband relay bouncing through 3 surviving shortwave towers. And enough canned lentils to keep me talking into this mic until someone finds me or shuts me up. If you're out there, anywhere, and you hear this, know that you're not alone. Know that there are people watching, listening, and recording what's left of the truth. I'll be back on the air at the top of the hour with more. Until then, stay low, keep warm, and trust your instincts. This is Noah Cray, Anchorage, Alaska. You're listening to what might be the last real broadcast out of the state. Stay sharp. Stay alive. This is Noah Cray, broadcasting again from Anchorage, Alaska. Shortwave relay at 7.400 megahertz. It's just after midnight, and I've been listening. Not just to the static or the ghost chatter on the mill bands. I've been listening to the bigger picture, trying to make sense of it. And that's the problem. None of it makes sense. Not the news, not the official statements, not even the silences. I spent most of the last 2 hours jumping between domestic AM stations, international shortwave broadcasts, and encrypted local Milcom bursts, trying to find something consistent, something grounded. But what I'm hearing isn't a single narrative. It's a dozen overlapping stories that all contradict each other. And if you've been paying attention to the headlines these past few weeks, maybe you felt it too. That quiet erosion of certainty, where the same event gets explained 3 different ways, depending on which outlet you're tuned into. It's not just misinformation anymore. It's fragmentation. And at the core of it, the same players. Russia, the United States. Always circling each other. Always daring the other side to blink first. But this time, the standoff didn't stay in the shadows. Let's walk it back. Everyone wants to talk about the Port Moller attack like it came out of nowhere. Like we were just living our quiet little lives and then, bam, surprise aggression. But if you were following policy circles, security briefings, or even halfway decent financial threads, you know this thing started way before a drone boat ever touched Alaskan soil. The tension's been building since 2028, when the Eurasian Energy Corridor opened. You remember that? Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and a few energy-rich satellites all pumping oil and gas east through protected trade lanes. At the time, it seemed like a weird infrastructural arms race. RBI. Lots of fanfare, fancy ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But under the surface, it was the start of a serious pivot away from US dollar dominance in the global energy market. That's when Washington started pushing back. Quietly. Sanctions on Russian industrial exports, naval drills in disputed Arctic waters, public support for Baltic border states, all of it designed to squeeze and contain, without ever saying it out loud. Then came the retaliation. Russia tightened cyber campaigns, especially against our satellite infrastructure. That's why so many of you started having GPS outages in the Midwest last year. They blamed it on solar interference. But if you dig through the logs, the anomalies were too clean. Precision jamming. Coordinated. Targeted not at cities or media, but at distribution centers and rail traffic. The arteries. We fired back with financial chokeholds, treasury blacklists, cryptocurrency seizures, frozen overseas accounts. One by one, the cracks in the system widened. International trade slowed. Nations started choosing sides again. And then, someone, I don't know who, maybe one of those never-elected advisors in a conference room with no windows, decided the best pressure point was Alaska. Now, I don't mean invasion, not at first. This wasn't about tanks on the tundra. It was about messaging, geography, showing teeth without biting. You've got to understand, Alaska's closer to Moscow than Washington, D.C. is. 9 time zones don't matter when you're sending a hypersonic vehicle that skips across the atmosphere. You think Russia doesn't know that? You think our own war planners haven't run simulations where the first 15 minutes of World War III take place here? 2-0. So they started poking. Russian aircraft pushed deeper into the ADIZ, that's the Air Defense Identification Zone. Used to be 1 or 2 incursions a month. Then 5, then 9. They stayed just long enough to trigger a scramble, then vanished. Testing reaction time. Our radar. Our rules of engagement. They started trailing fiber lines under the Bering, harassing trawlers. Flooding Arctic research bands with coded bursts that carried no signature but felt like reconnaissance probes. At one point, I even picked up what sounded like compressed spectral imagery. Photos. Maybe, taken from low altitude or high orbit. And all this time, the news just kept humming along like it was business as usual. Debates about celebrity lawsuits, corporate mergers, occasionally a line about increased tensions in the Pacific, buried under entertainment gossip and weather updates. I saw one report out of Moscow a week ago claiming the US had launched a cyber attack against a Gazprom facility in Chayanda, that the explosion there was sabotage. The article vanished within hours. Reposted only on fringe outlets. No confirmation. But I know the signature that facility used. They used to beacon on UHF every few days for telemetry checks. That beacon's been dead since August 6th. So who's lying? Everyone. Or maybe just no one knows what the hell is actually happening anymore. I want to be clear. I'm not saying we're innocent in this. Far from it. I've seen the flight plans. We've been running B-2 Spirit flyovers from Guam to the Sea of Okhotsk. We've got subs running patterns in the Arctic Circle that match launch prep scenarios. The 509th out of Missouri moved assets to Elmendorf 6 months ago. They didn't advertise that one. And now, here we are. The official line from DC today, and I mean official, this came from a Department of Defense media release at 4:40 p.m. Eastern, is that we are investigating unauthorized foreign maritime activity in the Alaskan Exclusive Economic Zone. That's the line. Unauthorized maritime activity, not an invasion, not a strike, not even an act of aggression, just activity. Meanwhile, local ham bands have gone dead from Juneau to Kotzebue. Fort Greely's repeater went dark this morning, and I've picked up at least 2 ground-level troop radio bursts in VHF, Russian origin, encrypted with short-burst frequency hopping. That's not something you do unless you're on the ground. Needing to avoid triangulation. That's battlefield tech. And yet, the major news outlets are still running B-roll footage of diplomats shaking hands in Geneva. They say negotiations are ongoing. If that's true, then either our government has no control over its own territory, or they're lying through their teeth. Here's something else. Today I picked up a weak sideband transmission from somewhere near Kodiak, probably bouncing off the hills or reflecting off snowpack. The signal was messy, but it was English. The voice said, "They're using our old logistics hub. The contractors let them in. We're moving east." Then, static. A few minutes later, another voice, V-mail, tight accent, came through in Russian. "All advance units, hold position. No retaliation unless fired upon. Base is secured." Repeat, base is secured. Then, silence. No call signs, no location markers. But that doesn't happen unless a site's been fully compromised. No one declares a base secured unless they're occupying it. I don't know what the game plan is. I don't know if this is meant to be a limited occupation, a psychological test, or a full-blown precursor to something bigger. But I know this much. Whatever's coming, it's already begun. And we're not ready. We're still arguing over whether it's real, still acting like we can delay acknowledging it long enough for the problem to go away. But I live here. I see the lights that aren't on, the roads that are now patrolled by vehicles without plates, the silence where voices used to be. If you're hearing this from somewhere warm, somewhere safe, you need to start preparing. Not because I'm telling you to panic, not because I think the missiles are about to fly, but because information is being cut, bent, or buried, and that always comes before something worse. This is not a war of conquest. Not yet. This is a war of confusion, of delay, of letting the other guy stumble while you pull the wires out of his machine. And if you're waiting for someone in a suit behind a podium to tell you what's happening, you're already 3 moves behind. This is Noah Cray, Anchorage, Alaska. Broadcasting from my attic, watching the sky, and hoping someone else out there is doing the same. Next hour, I'll read the full transcript of the shortwave exchanges I caught from the Northern Rail line last night, including a conversation I think came from a disabled train that was carrying evacuees out of Fairbanks before losing power. You'll want to hear that. Until then, stay aware. Don't trust silence. And if you've got signal, use it. If you're still out there, and I have to believe some of you are, I need you to sit with me for a while, because things have shifted again. Not all at once, not with sirens or screaming headlines, but like a glacier cracking under its own weight, silent at first, then impossible to ignore. It's now August 19th. The last time I had reliable comms with anyone in Kodiak was the night of the 16th. Since then, the airwaves have turned soft, muffled. I've gotten a handful of garbled VHF bursts, too faint to decode, and one broken ham relay from Homer that said simply, "They're here. They're in uniform. They're not flying our flag." No confirmation. No names. Just that. And in the meantime, what have we been told? That the situation is under review. That foreign incursions are being assessed. That federal authorities are coordinating with state officials to ensure stability. It's all so clean, so measured, so completely divorced from what we're actually living through. Here's what I know. Not from the news, not from official statements. From what I've heard with my own ears and seen with my own eyes. On the 17th, at around 10:30 p.m., there was an exchange of fire near Fort Glenn on Umnak Island. That's part of the old Cold War infrastructure. Used to be inactive, quiet. But in the last few years, the site was quietly upgraded. surveillance drones, a comms tower, satellite linkages. Some of you might remember hearing about it when a few contractors got caught posting selfies with restricted gear. That base was not abandoned. It was functional, and it was hit. I intercepted a UHF transmission fragment, routed through a mil-spec repeater that hadn't been active in 6 months. The voice was panicked, but trained. He said, "We are under sustained fire. Units unknown. Small arms and indirects. Grid 41 Alpha. Request QRF immediately." That's a call for quick reaction force. Standard protocol when an outpost comes under threat. 10 minutes later, a second voice came through. QRF. Denied. All assets frozen. Authorization required. And then nothing. No rescue. No follow-up. The station went dead an hour later. Let me translate what that means. Someone attacked a remote American outpost on U.S. soil, and no help was sent. Why? That's where the official explanations begin to unravel. Because on the same day, Moscow made a public statement accusing the United States of using Alaskan military bases to stage an unauthorized preemptive electronic strike against one of their early warning systems in the Chukotka region. They claimed we had jammed their orbital telemetry and caused a misfire alert in their northern defense grid. No evidence was presented, but they called it an act of aggression, not a mistake, not a malfunction. Aggression. And they made it very clear. If U.S. forces continue what they called escalatory behavior along the Arctic perimeter, they would respond in kind. 2 hours after that statement aired, the Russian Northern Fleet repositioned several missile-capable submarines closer to the Bering Sea. Again, no official announcement, but marine radar trackers, the kind of open-source stuff that hobbyists and amateur analysts use, showed unmistakable movements, strategic ones, and somewhere in Washington, a very serious decision was made. Because that night, Alaska's Emergency Coordination Center issued what they called a strategic readiness alert to local law enforcement and first responders. Not a public evacuation order, not a formal mobilization, just a quiet change in posture. Hospitals stocked up. Gas stations received emergency shipments. National Guard units were ordered to remain on base or in immediate vicinity. The implication was clear. Get ready to move people. But here's where things get messier. Because the federal government hasn't said a word about evacuation. Not on the news, not through FEMA, not through any official channel. Instead, I've gotten snippets. Low-priority text bursts, bouncing across old emergency infrastructure, suggesting that a limited voluntary relocation is being staged for communities in the southern coastal arc. That means Seward, Homer, Valdez, possibly even Kenai. Buses are moving under National Guard escort. No signage, no announcements, just quiet, coordinated extraction. The word being used on these internal communications is precautionary. But when you start clearing coastal zones without telling the public why, it doesn't feel like precaution. It feels like you're bracing for something incoming. And that brings us to the missiles. On August 18th, Russia formally stated through its Ministry of Defense that it considers any attempts to interfere with what they call their Arctic security perimeter to be grounds for non-conventional deterrence. These miling in there of nowitted, and it my the Rexons rided, hast win not any forgiven. That's the kind of language you use when you want to threaten a nuclear strike without actually saying the word. They're playing the ambiguity card, but make no mistake, they're testing our willingness to defend one of our own states. And they're doing it knowing full well that the rest of the country is distracted, politically fractured, logistically stretched. They've chosen their timing with surgical precision. Here in Anchorage, it's gotten quieter. That's the most unsettling part. There are fewer cars on the road, fewer lights on at night. Some people are leaving town. You can tell by the packed SUVs and trailers disappearing down the Glen Highway in the early hours. Others are staying, hunkering down, pretending it's just temporary. The local news stations have gone into what I can only describe as soft denial. They acknowledge that unidentified military activity has occurred, but they say there is no credible threat to the Anchorage Bowl. They're parroting the official line without really committing to it, but you can feel it in the air, like everyone's waiting for a second shoe to drop. I've spent the past 48 hours monitoring military satellite uplinks, EAM bursts, encrypted drone telemetries, and civilian aviation chatter. And everything points to a very simple, very frightening conclusion. The U.S. is preparing to lose control of part of Alaska, not permanently, not willingly, but tactically, temporarily. They're drawing a line between what they can defend and what they can't. And everything west of that line, Bethel, Dillingham, Nome, possibly even Kodiak, is being abandoned. That's the word I'm going to use. Abandoned. No one's going to say it on camera. No general is going to admit that on national TV. But the movement patterns, the radio silence, the sudden disappearance of federal response teams, it all fits. They're buying time, hoping this stays regional, that Russia doesn't push beyond what they've already taken, that maybe, just maybe, if they keep it quiet long enough, the world will get bored and move on. But that's not how this works. That's not how this ends. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a strategist. I'm just a guy in an attic with too many antennas and not enough sleep. But I know when the wind's shifting, and it's shifting fast. So if you're still with me, if you're somewhere out there, and you're listening to this on a battery-powered radio in a cabin, a garage, or a truck off the side of the highway, I want you to think about where you are, about who you trust, about what happens if tomorrow the power doesn't come back on, if the trucks don't return, if the internet goes from slow to gone, because that might be the next phase, and no one's coming on the evening news to warn you when it starts. This is Noah Cray, Anchorage, Alaska, broadcasting now on limited battery, shortwave frequency 7.400 megahertz. We've entered something new, not louder, not more violent, just colder, heavier, a silence that isn't natural, a silence that feels arranged. It's the 21st of August. I've been off the main line for almost 14 hours. My primary antenna relay went dark overnight. Could have been weather, could have been power fluctuations, but I think someone shut it off deliberately. When I climbed up onto the roof this morning to check the mast, the pivot clamp on the eastern yagi was loosened. The bolt didn't back out on its own. And the cabling, the braided coax I laid myself 3 years ago, was still warm at the port junction. Someone was up there. I don't live in a particularly visible part of town. My attic isn't listed on any grid registry. I run low-light LEDs behind blackout curtains. My comms gear is shielded. And yet, someone found the mast. I haven't seen my neighbor, Michael, in over 2 days. He used to wave from the stairs every morning, walking his mutt around the block like clockwork. Now his windows are dark and his pickup still parked under the birch tree, with frost rimming the windows. Could just be that he left. But I don't think so, because Anchorage has started to feel empty, not just quieter, empty. You'd think in times like these, when people start vanishing and the news goes vague, there'd be a rush to connect. Phones ringing, radios alive. But it's the opposite. It's like someone dialed the volume down on the entire city. I took a walk this morning, just around the neighborhood. Couldn't stand sitting by the scanner waiting for something to happen. So I walked. The traffic lights at Tudor and Arctic were flashing red, but there was no one to wait for. Half the shops still had open signs lit, timers ticking away to empty sidewalks. The grocery store had pallets out front, water, instant rice, some batteries, but no staff. The shelves had been ransacked clean, but someone had left the register open, like they thought they'd be back, or maybe they knew they wouldn't. Then I heard the planes, or rather, I didn't. Normally, this close to Elmendorf, you get a low rumble every few hours. Even during drills, there's always noise. The occasional KC-135 circling, a pair of F-22s on patrol. Not this week. For nearly 2 full days now, the sky has been empty. No commercial flights, no freight birds, nothing. Last known flight into Anchorage was a private medical charter out of Seattle. Cessna Citation, tail number N76VK, landed at 9:13 a.m. on the 19th. Never departed. Its transponder still pings from the south hangar. After that, nothing. That might seem trivial. Planes don't fly sometimes. Weather delays, airport closures, but not like this. Not all of them, and not without a statement. The FAA hasn't issued a single new NOTAM since the 19th. That's not how this works. The airspace didn't just go quiet. It was shut down. Deliberately. I've picked up 2 encrypted bursts from Alaskan AFB on a buried channel. The kind only used when uplinks are completely compromised. You know what that usually means? Either they're moving high-level assets out, or they're preparing for a strike. Which brings me to what happened near Dutch Harbor. Around 1:30 this morning, a maritime intercept was recorded by a private relay operated by an old friend of mine, Connor, who still lives near Alaska, retired Coast Guard. Keeps a passive hydrophone array in the bay. Obby stuff. Mostly. But it still works. He caught a surface comms burst between a U.S. patrol cutter and a civilian cargo ship entering the bay. The cutter issued 3 hails. No response. Then it repeated with a slightly more aggressive tone. Vessel Bravo 69er, you are entering U.S. territorial waters without clearance. Respond or alter course. The cargo ship responded after 20 seconds. Negative alteration. This route is a humanitarian corridor. Do not obstruct. Humanitarian corridor. In Alaska. From Russia, the cutter tried again. You do not have clearance under maritime law to enter this port. This will be considered an incursion. That was the last clean line before the entire channel was overrun by white band jamming. White band jamming is uncommon. It's brute force. Loud. Unsubtle. And it means whoever was on that ship didn't care about hiding. The thing is, this wasn't just a random foreign ship. The AIS signature, MUL, when I ran it against archived logs, belonged to a former Chinese cargo hauler, Xiangyu, deregistered in 2030 and supposedly scrapped in Vladivostok, except it wasn't. They renamed it, refitted it, and now it's operating under an NGO cover and flying a hybrid flag that doesn't belong to any nation on Earth. I'm not being figurative. I mean that literally. The emblem on its mast is a white half-sun on a field of charcoal, ringed in 11 stars. Not UN. Not Red Cross. Not WHO. Nothing recognized. Someone is laundering assets into Alaskan waters under invented flags, and we're letting it happen. I called a few old ham friends from back in the day, people in remote towers and mountaintop outposts, and they all said the same thing. They're seeing traffic without transponders, military vehicles painted in camo schemes that don't match U.S. or Canadian issue. Too clean, too quiet. And all the while, the official news cycles shifted tone again. Now, it's not about defense, not about escalation. It's about cooperation. Joint stability initiatives, they're calling it. One report said Washington is exploring multinational security collaboration in the Bering region. Translation: we're negotiating terms of occupation without saying the word. Just after noon today, I finally got a live call from someone inside the closed zone. Her name was Kendra. She's a nurse from Kodiak. Worked at the old Providence extension before it shut down. She got my relay frequency from an emergency bulletin I posted last week and managed to rig a broadcast through her car's ham rig. She sounded exhausted. Said most of the town was already emptied out. Ferries, taken. Airfield under control of contractors who refused to identify themselves. They weren't hostile, she said. Not yet. But they were rounding up people by neighborhood, assigning numbers, and telling them they'd be relocated. She asked where. They didn't answer. She said there were trucks, old military models with the numbers spray-painted off, parked at the ferry docks with trailers full of crates she couldn't identify. She saw one crack open when they loaded it. Inside were portable fuel cells, and something labeled in Cyrillic. She doesn't speak Russian, but she remembered one word: radon. It's a radioactive gas, often used in military and industrial sensors. But the fact that it was printed openly on a crate being unloaded in an American port, under armed guard, during an unacknowledged foreign incursion, that tells you all you need to know. This isn't a drill. This isn't posturing. This is active, on-soil infiltration. I'm going to shut down for now. Battery's low, and I don't want to overstay on this band. Too many unknown ears are listening. But I'll be back at 5:00 a.m. for anyone still tracking the coastal signals or picking up pings from the Denali relays. If anyone has access to orbital pathing or satellite movement data, check the thermals over the western slope of Wrangell. There's something there. I caught it twice now. A heat bloom too high to be geothermal and too symmetrical to be an accident. Until then, watch the sky. Stay ready. And remember, silence doesn't mean safety. This is Noah Cray, signing off. For now. Noah Cray, Anchorage, Alaska. Still here. Still on the air. 7.400 megahertz shortwave relay. If this reaches you, then you haven't gone completely dark yet. Or maybe you're close enough to still catch the bounce off the upper atmosphere. Either way, don't adjust your dial. You need to hear what I'm about to say. The world's pretending not to be at war, but the pretense is cracking. No more quiet incursions. No more silent handovers at coastal ports. No more indirect whispers on scrambled frequencies. Today, the gloves came off. Let's start with the headlines, since nobody else seems interested in giving you a straight version. Moscow's foreign ministry released a video this morning, D06:00 a.m. Moscow time, claiming that a coordinated series of terrorist attacks occurred in 3 separate Russian territories overnight. They blamed the United States. According to their statement, 2 power substations in Vladivostok were sabotaged by foreign actors, resulting in multiple casualties among civilian operators. A third site, a chemical processing facility near Ulan-Ude, experienced what they're calling a targeted explosion that disabled emergency containment systems and triggered a brief atmospheric release. They presented no footage, no casualty numbers, just heat-mapped satellite overlays and a press briefing with Minister Gromov standing in front of a flag half-shadowed and lit like a stage. But they're not interested in proving anything. The message was enough. Russia has declared these acts of state-sponsored terror and stated they will respond with all appropriate force. Now, we can argue all night whether the United States actually did it. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. The truth is, in this kind of game, evidence doesn't matter. Just accusation, just escalation. And right on cue, Washington responded. President Dalton called an emergency NATO assembly at 2 p.m., and what followed was a statement that will probably be remembered in the same breath as 9/11 or the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States, he said, considers the recent loss of American territory, the sabotage of our northern radar defense grid, and the hostile infiltration of civilian ports as acts of war by the Russian Federation. Not alleged acts, not suspected. Acts of war. He then invoked Article 5 of the NATO Charter, mutual defense, collective response. For those of you who haven't brushed up on post-WWW treaties, Article 5 says if one member of NATO is attacked, all members must respond. It's only been triggered once, after 9/11. And even then, it was mostly symbolic. This time, not symbolic. As I say these words, British, German, Polish, and Norwegian forward deployment units are being moved by airlift to bases in Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. Some already arrived. Troops, armor, air defense batteries, and more importantly, missile countermeasure systems, which means NATO is preparing for the possibility of a cross-border strike from Russian soil. And here, in Alaska, it's no longer a whisper war. We are officially in open combat. Around 11, 40 this morning, I intercepted a scrambled UHF burst routed from Fort Richardson to Elmendorf's secure net. It included this line: confirmed engagement at mile marker 103, Glen Highway. Enemy combatants on site. Light armor support. Civilians evacuated. Forward fire teams holding perimeter. Enemy combatants. Armor support. That's not covert activity anymore. That's military terminology for direct engagement. And it wasn't the only one. At 12, a shortwave relay near King Salmon picked up a skirmish west of the airport. Not foreign troops, but what they described as Russian-speaking paramilitary forces, operating in coordination with unmarked aerial drones. This isn't the hypothetical anymore. This is boots-on-soil combat on American land. To understand how fast this changed, you've got to look at what happened yesterday. I spent the 20th and most of the 21st listening to the Sitka emergency relay and tracking a strange looped weather beacon bouncing off Mount Edgecombe. It kept transmitting the same 30-second loop, over and over again. This is Humanitarian Corridor Bravo Charlie 4. Authorized vessels only. Maintain course. Maintain radio silence. Humanitarian Corridor. That phrase again. They've been using it since the first Russian-aligned ships slipped into Unalaska Bay. At first, I thought it was a ruse, a cover for equipment or troop movement. But I've come to believe there is a humanitarian operation taking place, just not one we control. Reports from communities along the southern Kenai coast, IMD, mostly secondhand, some confirmed, say evacuees are being picked up by ships bearing hybrid insignias, loaded into modular transport containers, and taken out into the Gulf. Their destinations? Unknown. And there's no evidence those evacuees are making it back to the U.S. mainland. I intercepted one ham broadcast from a man named Harold out of Clam Gulch. He said his niece was loaded onto a vessel 2 nights ago. They told her she'd be taken to Juneau for processing. He hasn't heard from her since. He drove east and found the highway blocked by a line of vehicles bearing U.N. style markings. But the accents of the men who stopped him were not European. He said they didn't speak unless directly addressed. And when he asked where the ship was going, one of them replied, "You don't need to know. That's not a refugee operation. That's a reassignment." So where's our military? Where are the columns of Abrams tanks? The roaring Apache squadrons? The show of force? Well, some are still here. Fort Wainwright is still operational, though comms are limited. Eielson launched 3 drones last night, likely in preparation for a precision strike campaign along the Aleutian staging points. But the truth is, they're pulling back. You don't have to be a strategist to see it. The U.S. is drawing a line down central Alaska. Everything west of that line is either already lost or being offered as part of a temporary stand-down. They're consolidating. Defensible positions only, and if they can't hold anchorage, they'll pull again. The question is why? Why give up ground so easily? Why let a foreign power occupy our ports and run humanitarian corridors out of American territory? And the answer might be more horrifying than anything I've shared so far. Because the intelligence community already knows this war is going to spread. Not in Alaska, not in Eastern Europe, everywhere. This is the soft beginning, the icebreaker, the moment where just enough blood is spilled that no one can walk it back. And the reason no one is saying the word war yet is because they need one more day, one more vote, one more briefing, one more false flag or exploded substation or botched convoy before they can say it with a straight face and get away with it. But make no mistake, it has already started. As for me, I'm still here, still broadcasting, still rotating frequencies every 6 hours and cycling power manually to avoid triangulation. I've got 1 solar panel left intact, enough to keep the board lit and the signal moving. I'll be back on the air just after 3 a.m. I've got a relay friend in Eagle who claims to have seen a new class of drone operating along the interior. Long range, silent flight, vectoring without transponder ID. Until then, conserve energy. Don't trust anything without a voice. And remember, the war didn't begin with sirens. It began with silence. It's August 23rd. We've entered a new phase. I know I keep saying that, but it's not hyperbole. The situation evolves every 24 hours, sometimes faster. This morning, I opened my window and watched a trail of smoke rising beyond the ridge near Eagle River. Not forest fire smoke, not chimney haze. A long, thin plume of gray-white stretching up from the horizon, rising too fast to be natural. That was a missile. The strike occurred just past 5 a.m. I counted 2 distant impacts based on acoustic delay, and a third a few seconds later, likely a secondary. Sources from ham relay stations in Palmer and Wasilla confirmed a low-flying drone platform crossed the Matsu Valley before the explosion. They described it as silent and smooth, bearing no identifiable markings. The initial blast hit a comms tower near an unlisted logistics station northeast of Mirror Lake. Second hit went deeper. We think a hardened military cache. Third detonation triggered a fuel dump near an old pipeline spur. The United States has not responded publicly. The Air Force has not issued any advisories. NORAD has not declared a DEFCON shift. But we all know what we saw. For the first time since this began, we have confirmed foreign ordnance detonating on U.S. soil, outside of Alaska's coastal perimeter. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a malfunction. It was precise, intentional, and quiet. Too quiet. And just hours after the strike, Moscow held a live press conference. President Rykov stood on the steps of the Kremlin flanked by his defense minister, and he spoke with the same calm, rigid control he's been known for. I watched a stream mirrored from a Japanese rebroadcaster. The original was geo-blocked. In that speech, he called the missile strike a corrective action taken in response to unlawful military buildup by hostile forces in the Arctic zone. He went further. He said the United States had abused its influence in global alliances and provoked conflict through covert sabotage and information warfare. And then came the real shift. He called the current engagement a special military operation to neutralize regional threats and protect sovereign economic interests. Sound familiar? That's the same phrasing Russia used to justify the 22 invasion of Ukraine. And now, it's being used to frame missile attacks on U.S. territory. And then came the list. Rykov read the names slowly, like each one was part of a strategy already drafted months ago. Belarus pledged full logistical and intelligence support for Russian operations in the Western Theater, including potential coordination with Kaliningrad-based defense assets. Turkey declared non-aligned cooperative neutrality, with a clause stating it reserves the right to respond to NATO provocations that destabilize regional peace. That's double-speak for, we might help if it benefits us. Hey. Afghanistan, released a joint statement through a Russian liaison expressing condemnation of U.S. military bases in Central Asia. This morning, insurgent groups reportedly took control of a former U.S. airstrip near Herat. The flag flying over it now isn't familiar. India didn't pledge troops or weapons, but in an emergency press release, they announced a freeze on all defense cooperation projects with the United States pending re-evaluation. They also confirmed participation in resource coordination drills with Russian naval groups in the Indian Ocean. Now, this doesn't mean World War III has kicked off in full everywhere. Not yet. But it does mean alliances are shifting. Fast. And not in our favor. At least 3 missile platforms have been confirmed moving through Central Asia. Military radio tracking stations in Poland picked up encrypted telemetry bursts consistent with hypersonic weapon test profiles. And now we've got open military engagement in Eastern Europe. At 2:14 p.m., a skirmish broke out along the Belarus-Lithuania border. Lithuanian Border Patrol exchanged fire with what they described as unidentified armed personnel operating under Belarusian insignia. Casualties are unconfirmed. A few hours later, Turkish naval ships shadowed a U.S. carrier group through the eastern Mediterranean, issuing proximity warnings every time the formation changed speed. It's happening on every continent now. Not in waves, in sparks, small flames, setting tinder to dry soil, and we're still calling it Tensions. Here in Alaska, the silence is starting to crack. We have confirmation that Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson was fully activated this morning. My contact near the range sent a short encrypted ping. Full mobilization. Convoys headed north. Perimeter hard. The 79'd us. That's military speak for we're done pretending. The northern perimeter line is being fortified. Not patrolled. Fortified. That means they're expecting either a push from the interior or a deep strike meant to collapse anchorage from the outside. But here's the part I didn't expect. I intercepted a burst from a tactical repeater just east of Denali. One I didn't know was active. It bounced once, then again, then held for nearly a full minute on an open frequency. That's rare and risky. The voice came through clearly. Male, young, American accent. This is Foxtrot Command. We are confirming foreign base construction west of Talk Cutoff. Multiple prefabs. Vehicle bay, comms tower, 15 clicks from our last position. Requesting authority to engage. Then silence. Then a voice, a woman, clipped and deliberate, and said, negative. Maintain observation. Do not provoke. That tells me everything I need to know. They know where the Russians are building, and they're being told not to engage. Not yet. So where does this leave us? We have confirmed missile strikes on U.S. territory, foreign ground infrastructure inside Alaska's interior, NATO forces deploying across Europe, proxy states aligning with Russia, U.S. airspace in partial lockdown, special operations being used as cover for open war. And still, no formal declaration. I know, I'm just a voice on a radio. A guy in an attic with one solar panel and a rigged signal booster. But I've seen this play out before. Not at this scale, but the rhythm of it. The way things collapse. First, the information gets muddy. Then the logistics. Then the movement. Then the memory. That's why I'm documenting this. So when the lights go out, someone remembers what the beginning looked like. I'll be back on the air at 4 a.m. to share intercepted data from a failed drone strike intercepted near Delta Junction. One of the payloads didn't detonate. My contact is trying to get inside before it's recovered. If you've got a working rig, stay on this band. If you've got fuel, ration it. And if you've still got someone to talk to, say what you need to say. Tonight, because tomorrow might not wait. It's August 30th. 1 week since the first direct missile strike on American soil. 7 days of silence, noise, chaos, and movement all at once. A week where every 24 hours feels like a lifetime. A week where I've watched my city slowly unravel into something unrecognizable. And today, for the first time since this started, I've made a decision. I need to move. Not because I want to. Not because I've got some destination or plan or golden ticket out of here. But because the math no longer adds up. Anchorage is too close to the front, even if they won't admit there is one. And the signs, they're piling up. I'm no soldier. I'm not tactical. But I know how to count risk. And right now, the number of things that can go wrong in this city outnumber the things I can still control. The last train out of Anchorage left 3 days ago. Quietly. No announcement. A private rail contract. Supposedly doing industrial offload. But it carried civilians, a lot of them. The rail yard crew told people not to bring electronics. No phones, no GPS. Just their ID and what they could carry in one bag. A one-way ticket to Fairbanks, maybe further. I didn't go. I wasn't ready. I thought I could hold out here a little longer. I might have been wrong. The air is different now. Lower, tighter. I haven't heard a commercial plane in over 10 days. The few helicopters that buzz overhead are low altitude, unmarked, and they don't linger. Nobody waves anymore. Most windows are shuttered, boarded, or just empty. The city still has power, for now. But signals are getting shorter. Strong local repeaters don't ping back like they used to. Some of them have gone completely dark. Others answer with automated loops that don't make sense. Weather alerts with outdated timestamps. Military burst relays that repeat the same message, word, for days at a time. That's not coordination. That's abandonment. And while we're hanging on here, trying to pretend Alaska is just a remote edge in a bigger war. The world beyond the snowline is lighting up. Let me give you the picture. On August 25th, Turkey launched coordinated strikes into northern Syria. They claimed it was to eliminate terrorist strongholds near the border. But the airfields they hit, they were operated by NATO-aligned logistics teams. No official deaths confirmed, but the chatter suggests otherwise. The same day, Belarusian armored divisions crossed into eastern Ukraine under the pretext of protecting Slavic civilians from foreign sabotage. In the Caucasus, Armenia and Azerbaijan reignited hostilities over the Nagorno-Karabakh corridor. That conflict had been simmering for decades. Now it's flaring again, and Russian advisors are already stationed on both sides, calling it a containment presence. China has gone from cautious to active. Last night, they declared full support for regional stabilization efforts led by the Russian Federation and its legitimate allies. That's not diplomatic language. That's alignment. And less than 24 hours ago, sleeper agents across Europe and North America made their presence known. Sabotage operations have been confirmed in Germany, France, and the eastern U.S. corridor. A rail hub outside of Chicago suffered a catastrophic derailment after its digital signal system was overridden. Officials blame technical failure, but multiple anonymous whistleblowers say a malicious firmware update was pushed to the system 2 days earlier. A power distribution node near Lyon, France, exploded in the early morning hours, knocking out electricity to nearly 1 million homes. Surveillance footage showed no external breach, but technicians say a firmware key used in older Soviet infrastructure matched the checksum of the control code. We used to talk about cyber attacks as theory. We're past theory. This is full-spectrum warfare. Physical, digital, psychological. And now, the bombs have started falling, not just in Alaska, not just here. Yesterday, a Russian long-range bomber launched a hypersonic cruise missile from the Sea of Okhotsk into northeastern Japan. The target? A listening post operated jointly by the U.S. and Japan for over 20 years. The facility was reduced to ash in less than 3 seconds. Japan called it a violation of sovereignty. The Russian press called it a decisive moment in global rebalancing. In response, the United States launched a retaliatory strike, 21-4, a targeted barrage of low-yield guided munitions aimed at a suspected Russian forward operating base on Wrangel Island. But something went wrong. One of the missiles veered off trajectory and struck a civilian research outpost on the Chukchi coast. 12 dead. Russian state media ran the footage every hour on the hour. They call it murder. They call it proof. And then, the line was crossed. This morning, President Dalton took the podium with his national security advisor and delivered a statement broadcast across all remaining U.S. military and emergency frequencies. His voice didn't shake. He didn't blink. He said, "Let me be perfectly clear. If the Russian Federation continues to violate U.S. territorial integrity and endanger American lives through these ongoing strikes, the United States is prepared to escalate to strategic-level deterrence. We will not hesitate to use nuclear force if national survival demands it." There it is, the one word no one wanted to say, spoken in daylight. Nuclear. I'm not going to speculate on whether we're truly one step away from a launch, but I can tell you this. Every hardened relay station I know of went into signal suppression mode immediately after that broadcast. That's what they do when things are about to go hot. To prevent guidance tracking, to mask location, to scatter comms. That means every tool we've built to stop missiles from flying is being readied in case they do. And here I am, still sitting in a slowly freezing attic, watching the power grid flicker, and wondering how many days I have left before Anchorage becomes a ghost town or a crater. So I made a call. I'm leaving. I've packed what I can into a weatherproof backpack. Canned food, radio gear, a hand crank battery, and one burner phone with a preloaded offline map of the interior. I'm heading north. Not into the wild, not yet. I'll try to reach a safe house near Talkeetna, where an old ham friend set up a solar shack years ago. He's probably long gone, but the equipment might still work. From there, I'll keep moving. Not because I think it'll save me, but because staying here is a form of surrender. And I'm not ready to surrender. Before I go, I'm going to set this station to loop broadcast a set of warning messages and signal directions for anyone still near Anchorage. If you're listening, follow the beacon tones north. Avoid direct contact with any convoy not clearly marked with U, S, or NATO signals. Don't trust uniforms without unit patches. I'll transmit again once I re-establish signal at the Talkeetna node. If it's offline, I'll find another. This war isn't just about land or resources. It's about perception. It's about who tells the story when the dust settles. And I'm going to keep telling it as long as I'm breathing. Noah Cray, reporting from somewhere along the Parks Highway, north of Anchorage. This is shortwave 7.400 megahertz, patched through a mobile uplink scavenged from an old forestry tower east of Nancy Lake. I've managed to reconnect this signal on battery backup with a half-dead solar mat. It's rough, but you're hearing me. That's all that matters. If you're still tracking my signal, then you know the last time I broadcasted, I was preparing to leave Anchorage. That was 6 days ago. I wasn't sure I'd make it out, but I did. Not clean, not smooth, but I got through. The city was already half abandoned when I moved. The power grid was unstable, especially on the east side. Substations had gone into lockdown, lights flickered without pattern, and a few neighborhoods had already fallen into total blackout. The only movement I saw came from unmarked trucks heading west toward Turnagain Arm. No insignia, no license plates, just convoys that didn't stop for anything. It's hard to explain how quiet a city becomes when everyone who can leave already has. No engines, no dogs, just the wind through broken signs and the occasional static crackle from radios left on in empty stores. I crossed the bridge near Knik Arm on foot after finding the main road barricaded by National Guard elements who weren't letting anyone through. They didn't stop me. They didn't even notice me. Most of them were sitting against the trucks, heads down, gear scattered. I don't think they were even being resupplied anymore. Just waiting. North of the city, the roads are torn up. Not by bombs. Not yet. But by the weight of too many vehicles trying to get out at once. Burned out sedans. Abandoned campers. One turned-over school bus, half frozen in the ditch near Eklutna. Spray paint on the side said, "No room." They are back to be mending. I don't know what that means. I didn't stop to check. And while I was moving, the world fell into the dark. Global blackouts. First scattered, then strategic, now expanding. The first wave hit on the 31st, just after midnight GMT. Power grids in Taiwan, Vietnam, and large portions of northern India went offline within minutes of one another. Officials called it cascading infrastructure failure due to unstable weather, but we all know better. 4 hours later, the entire California grid collapsed. No warning, no wind, no cyber attack claim. Just sudden, total silence from LA to Sacramento. By dawn, reports came in from Portugal, Finland, and parts of Mexico, then Algeria, then Ontario. And this morning, Japan confirmed that 3 of its eastern districts suffered complete power loss of unknown origin. The United States responded immediately, accusing China of deploying new electromagnetic pulse systems, highly directional, portable, and tuned for regional saturation. Not nuclear, no visible blast. Just darkness. Burned transformers. Knocked out comms. Beijing, of course, denied everything. They called it a reckless accusation, fueled by internal failure and incompetence. They claimed the U.S. grid was already unstable, and that blaming China reflects a lack of preparation. But several independent analysts have already confirmed signal anomalies that match known EMP test signatures from a classified Chinese defense project codenamed MLU, or Deer Road. This isn't theory. We're in it now. And it's not just about the power. This is about breaking rhythm, disrupting civilian nerve centers, taking people back to the Stone Age in seconds, not weeks. Think about it. No lights, no refrigeration, no digital banking, no fuel pumps, no communications. And then come the fear, the looting, the rationing, and Once a city cracks, it doesn't patch. It falls. Here's a brief global roundup from the last 72 hours. If you're near a shortwave receiver, copy these details. Paris. Major rioting near Montparnasse station after a power outage left half the city without drinking water. The French government declared a limited state of emergency and deployed armed gendarmerie units to protect food convoys. Local ham reports say 2 units were overrun by civilians demanding safe passage out of the urban zone. Pakistan. Violent protests in Karachi and Lahore turned into full-scale riots after an American drone was downed over Peshawar. The government claims it was unauthorized surveillance. Washington hasn't responded. Rumors suggest Pakistani command received real-time support from an unknown foreign advisory team during the shootdown. Nigeria. Armed separatists attacked federal military positions in Benue State, claiming they were reclaiming territory lost to illegitimate Western influence. Several local militia groups have declared open alignment with Russia, calling it the only power willing to support African independence. Baltic region, Estonia and Latvia have fully closed borders with Belarus and Russia, citing an immediate threat of infiltration. Massed armor units were observed along the Daugava River. Polish radio has gone mostly silent. South Korea. Satellite footage suggests an increase in Chinese naval presence in the Yellow Sea. Seoul has activated its nationwide civil defense drills for the first time since 2027. Taiwan. Not officially invaded. Not bombed. But paralyzed. Total power outage. No flights. No working ports. They're being squeezed without a shot. The message from all of this is clear. If the United States is going to protect its interests, it has to be everywhere at once. And we can't be. And so, the cracks widen. Not from missiles, not from troops, but from silence, darkness, and the fear that comes when nothing turns back on. As for me, I'm still moving. Slowly, carefully. I made it to a wooded area between Willow and Talkeetna, off the main road. There's an old ranger station here, half collapsed, but the frame held. I found a functioning weather relay mast that still has intermittent juice, enough to amplify my signal if I pulse it low and short. I'm not alone out here either. This morning, I spotted 2 figures moving on the ridgeline, dressed in dark snow gear. No patches, no lights. They saw me, but didn't approach. They weren't hunting, just watching. I stayed out of sight. Maybe they're scouts. Maybe they're civilians like me. Or maybe this entire region is already being marked for occupation. We won't know until it's too late. I heard Anchorage was hit again. Not confirmed. But a relay contact in Eagle said a low-yield munition struck near the industrial corridor east of Merrill Field. Fire, followed by silence. No air traffic since. No drone pings. The relay tower at Potter Marsh has gone completely dead. It might not be livable anymore. If you're still there, get out. This is the turning point. The break line. Every military analyst I've trusted over the last decade said the next war wouldn't be about conquest. It would be about disruption. Not holding cities, but disabling them. And now it's happening. Power by power. Grid by grid. Country by country. And the worst part? It's working. I'll be back on the air when I can retune the relay's capacitor and get a clean burst signal. I'm saving my strength, my batteries, my mind, because if things go quiet here, I may not be able to talk again. Until then, stay off the major roads. Avoid all aircraft without open band ID beacons. Do not attempt to return to cities. If you've got light, keep it low. If you've got family, hold them close. This is Noah Cray. Somewhere in the trees. Still listening. Still alive. And still telling the story while I still can. If you're hearing this, it means I've managed to repair the frequency dampener I found tucked inside the old fire cache off Moose Creek Ridge. It's holding steady for now. And if I've got signal, then you still have time. It's September, twund. The first snow hasn't hit yet, but the temperature has dropped hard every night. Even the rivers feel sluggish, like everything's holding its breath. I know that feeling. We all do now. The past 48 hours have changed everything again. The world's running out of food, and the people who still have some, they've stopped sharing. Every small town I've passed since leaving Anchorage has the same look now. Hollow-eyed residents walking between half-empty shelves, cardboard signs begging for propane, gas, flour. The last grocery store I saw near Trapper Creek had nothing but powdered drink mix, expired marshmallows, and off-brand pet food. The produce section had been cleared out and replaced with firewood, most of it still wet. And it's not just rural. I intercepted a repeating VHF band from a Coast Guard vessel near Juneau reporting significant disruption to inbound maritime logistics. Translation: no ships, no containers, no food. Fuel shipments have either been rerouted, seized, or turned back due to military corridor interference. And when the food stops coming, panic starts. Reports out of Vancouver say the port riots lasted nearly 6 hours. Dock workers were attacked by locals when it became clear no civilian aid ships were scheduled to arrive. Over in Anchorage, NK, before I left, I saw 3 different fights break out in the same store in one afternoon. One over a bag of rice, one over dry dog food, one over propane bottles someone tried to hide in their coat. People are scared, but it's more than that now. They're becoming unhinged. We all knew cities would crack first, but now even the roadways are starting to show signs of collapse. This morning I passed a family broken down near the pullout at Cashwitna Lake. Father, mother, 2 kids. Their pickup had overheated, and the father was trying to boil snow in a coffee can over a backpacking stove to top off the radiator. I gave him what I could. A bottle of coolant I pulled off an abandoned Ranger truck 2 nights ago. He didn't ask for food. Just looked at me like I wasn't real, then thanked me without blinking. Said they were headed to the station north of the Denali line. That caught my attention. There's nothing official listed north of Denali. No outposts, no shelters. Not anymore. Most of that region was designated non-essential by FEMA 10 years ago. So I asked what he meant. He said someone on the road told him about a listening post, ex-military, ex-NATO, that had been abandoned years ago but might still have power and supplies. I didn't tell him I'd heard the same rumor. I just nodded. And I followed the general direction he pointed me in. It took most of the afternoon, but I found it. Northwest Ridge, past the old logging trail. A shallow bunker reinforced with thick steel and a crumbling cement hatch buried under spruce needles. The kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The paint had worn off, but you could still make out the ghost of the NATO emblem above the door. The lock had been cut long ago. Inside, it smelled of stale paper, battery acid, and cold metal. A room full of silent terminals. 2 diesel generators that hadn't run in years. But the relay panel, that still worked. Faint hum. 1 green light blinking. Enough. I bypassed the manual switch and rigged my portable inverter into the signal port. Took some time, but I managed to cycle through the last stored logs. Some of the data was corrupted, but one file wasn't. It was a continuous intercept loop of encrypted satellite communications bouncing off low-orbit SIGINT birds. Most of the file was gibberish. Fragmented code, timestamps, and burst pulses. But one stream stood out. A message fragment, repeated every 4 hours. Clear enough to decipher, even without the full key. Condition granted. Strike scenario Delta 12. Awaiting final confirmation. And then this. Strategic authority granted by Northern Command. Nuclear contingency in motion. No nation identified. No time frame. But it's real. It's there. Someone out there is preparing a first strike scenario. Not a drill. Not a simulation. A real, signed-off launch path. I don't know if it's us. Or them. Or both. But the clock has started. I tried to upload the full file to an emergency NATO relay address. I remembered from years ago, but the link's dead. It bounced, like it never existed. So I copied the full burst log to a hardened drive and buried a backup near the ridge. GPS coordinates stored in analog. If you're hearing this and you know how to find me, reach out. I'll tell you where it is. If something happens to me, that data needs to survive. Because the news sure as hell won't tell you. The last transmission from the White House came 12 hours ago. The president is no longer issuing daily addresses. Instead, the military has started leading briefings. Stark, uniformed, no questions. One of the generals referred to the current state as final positioning for survivability assets. That's code. I know it. You don't say survivability unless you think parts of the country won't make it. And still, there's no formal declaration, no sirens, no global press release, just darkness. Static, cities running out of food, roads blocked by military checkpoints that no longer respond to radio, people heading north because there's nowhere else to go. I've met others on the trail now. Not many, but enough. Small groups, families. One old man traveling alone with nothing but a CB radio and a cracked thermos. He said he used to be a teacher. Said he couldn't watch another classroom get turned into a shelter without walls. I walked with him for a while, shared some of my heat packs. Then we split. He headed east. I kept north. That's how it is now. Cross for a while. Move on. No time for long goodbyes. Just motion. Just survival. Tomorrow I'll try to make it to the tree line. There's supposed to be a ranger station up there with a ham tower strong enough to relay across the Yukon. If I can boost signal again, I'll send this message across as many bands as I can. If I can't, then this may be the last clean broadcast you hear from me. No promises. Only this. I will keep recording, even if I can't transmit, even if it's just into tape. Someone has to remember how this happened. Someone has to say it wasn't sudden, that we let it happen in silence, in pride, in power plays and cowardice. This is Noah Cray, transmitting for what may be the last time. I'm broadcasting from a half-frozen ranger tower north of the Susitna River Basin, elevation around 2,400 feet. Line of sight clear to the edge of Denali. The tower creaks with every gust of wind, but the mast is holding. I've patched into the backup generator using cables. I stripped off an old repeater box. And for now, the batteries are hot enough to keep the signal pulsing. You're tuned to shortwave 7.400 megahertz. If you're still listening, you're one of the last. Because the noise out there isn't just static anymore. It's panic, screaming, rumors, gunfire, looped emergency messages playing to no one. The world hasn't ended all at once. It's just coming apart in pieces. It's September 4th, just after dusk. The clouds are lower than I've seen in years, and the wind smells like melted plastic and ash. I don't know if it's drift from the refinery fires in southern Anchorage or something worse. There's been no confirmation from the satellites, not that we can trust them now. The last orbital relay went dark 12 hours ago. No more weather data, no more encrypted command bursts. The skies are still full. He can see the contrails, but nobody's broadcasting a flight map. A few of us in the ranger station tracked what looked like a coordinated formation, crossing into the interior. No transponders, no lights, just 25 to 30 dots moving low and fast. Could have been ours, could have been theirs, could have been both. Nobody fired, but nobody blinked either. Around the world, the cracks have widened. Cities are burning not because they were bombed, but because people finally understood the systems weren't coming back online. New York's blackout never lifted. Looting turned to riots. The National Guard fell back from Queens when 3 of their convoys were hit by coordinated ambushes. Not foreign, not military, just desperate locals, armed with black market rifles and stolen uniforms. Governor's office, no longer taking calls. Manhattan was already a ghost shell. Now it's cut off completely. In Germany, thousands tried to flee Berlin when the Polish border closed. The autobahns were locked by tanks. No one passed. I heard a relay from a Dutch volunteer group, begging for insulin, generators, clean water, anything. No answer. South Africa saw its government collapse last night. Power failures led to factional breakaways in Johannesburg and Cape Town. Ports seized, Airport staff walked out. Their president hasn't been seen in days. South Korea has stopped responding to international comms. Taiwan's last radio burst simply read, "You're on your own." And India's streets are boiling. Food riots in Kolkata and Delhi led to clashes between police and civilians, then between military and police. Now no one's in charge. Russia's embassy remains open. The U.S. mission was overrun and abandoned this morning. And the nukes? No one's launched yet, but it's closer. Tangibly closer. The granite alert I intercepted 2 days ago is now repeating with no timestamp. That means the launch code verification loop is active. In one of the major powers, I still don't know which, the chain of custody for strategic weapons has entered final readiness. That doesn't mean they'll press the button, but it means they've set the clock, and everyone else is watching with their fingers twitching. The United States has publicly stated it will not initiate a nuclear strike unless another power does first. But unofficially, the codename Northern Shield Delta is bouncing across secure channels. That was never part of our known protocols. It's new. And it showed up right after Beijing made its final statement. Beijing called this the moment of reckoning for Western hegemony. They're backing Russia's claim that the United States initiated aggression through economic destabilization, cyber attacks, and illegal NATO expansion. They stopped short of promising military support, but everyone knows it's already happening. They've moved armor into Kazakhstan, drones into the Bering Corridor, and last night, a sonar listening post off the coast of Alaska picked up multiple hull signatures approaching from the west, not US, not Canadian. They're coming. And still, the people at the top argue about press language and public statements. We're past statements. We're past policy. This is the quiet collapse, the kind where supplies stop showing up, the kind where hospitals run out of oxygen and antibiotics, where local sheriffs have to choose between guarding the food depot or guarding their own homes, where kids stop asking what's going on and start asking what burned wiring smells like. Here in the Ranger Tower, I've been joined by two more people, a woman named Ray and her brother Micah, both from Fairbanks. They'd heard my earlier broadcast and followed the signal. They don't talk much. Ray used to work in a school cafeteria. Micah fixed generators for a living. They brought me a canister of kerosene and a hand crank they pulled from a snowmobile garage. Saved my life, probably. Now we rotate watch. Take turns sleeping. Nobody says it, but we're all waiting for the same thing. The flash. The siren. The moment when the sky goes red. And still, there are signals. One from Prague. DAI. Faint. Full of static. But real. A medical student trying to keep a basement clinic running with solar panels and melted snow. One from Georgia. The country, not the state. Where a priest is using a retired shortwave rig to read old broadcasts and quote pages from a banned history book. One from Montana, where a group of off-grid survivalists is offering to trade water filters for antibiotics and copper wire. The world hasn't ended. But it stopped pretending things are okay. And, in that honesty, there's something real. If you're hearing me, here's what I want you to know. You're not alone. You're not wrong to be scared. And you're not powerless. You can still move, still prepare, still hide, still record, still remember, still speak, because when the last official voice falls silent, the rest of us are all that's left. And we owe it to whoever comes next to leave more than rubble. I'll keep broadcasting until I can't, until the fuel runs dry, until the signal dies, until they find this tower, or until that last launch key turns, until the sky goes red. This is Noah Cray, Alaska, radio station 88.7. Still transmitting. Still alive. Stay human.